I'm Kimberly Washburn, Curator of Education at the Florence County Museum. Welcome to February's Family Day at Home. This month we're focusing on projects that deal with texture, and our first project is called Simple Stitches. We're going to be using the rough texture of burlap to create a stitched drawing on our fabric. So you're going to need to gather a few things from your Family Day at Home kit. You're going to need your piece of burlap. You're going to need a white piece of paper. I've already drawn on mine, but you have a blank white piece of paper in your kit. You're going to need your plastic bag with yarn and a little plastic yarn needle inside. And you're also going to need to gather a couple of things from around the house. You're going to need some scissors, a pencil, and if you have a marker, this might come in handy. Any kind of marker will work. A Sharpie marker, a washable marker, a highlighter, any kind of marker that you have is going to help you in this project. So if you have one of those, grab a marker as well. The first thing you need to do is decide what you want your stitched design to look like. I've gone ahead and drawn on my paper a butterfly design, and I'm going to transfer that to my piece of burlap. Now there's a couple of ways that you can go about this. If you have a black Sharpie marker or even just a black Crayola marker, you can trace the lines of your drawing. I made my drawing with a pencil. You can trace the lines of your drawing with a black marker. And when I put this piece of paper underneath my burlap, I can see those lines. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but I can see the lines of my drawing peek through from underneath the burlap. Now, if you do not have a black marker that you can use to trace your design in, you can also draw your design and then just cut right around the edges and then place it on top and trace it on top of the burlap. But because I can see mine, I'm gonna put it underneath. And I'm going to use a marker just to trace the lines of my drawing right onto the burlap. Now, if you don't have a marker handy, then you might be able to use an ink pen for this, or maybe even a pencil. You just kind of have to go a little slower and really intentionally get those marks transferred. Now the burlap does want to wiggle around a little bit while I'm doing this, so I'm holding it in place with my left hand. I'm right-handed, so I'm drawing with my right hand and holding it in place with my left hand so it doesn't wiggle around on me too much. Okay, so I'm just tracing around my drawing. I know it might be hard for you to see my drawing through the burlap, but I can see it just well enough to get my design traced. I'm almost finished, just going all the way around. And if your lines are not perfect, if you don't get it traced exactly perfectly, then that's no problem. Just the best you can will be great. Okay, very close, just last wing, one last butterfly wing to finish up. And trying to keep everything still with my fingers. If you're doing this project with little children, it might help to tape the burlap down with some masking tape or have a grown-up hold it. Okay, so I've transferred my design to my burlap and just the outline of it. Now I'm ready to start drawing with stitches. So I'm going to show you two very simple basic stitches that you can use to trace the lines to make a colorful textured drawing. Now in your plastic bag you have 4 pieces of yarn, a white speckled piece, a green piece, a red piece, a blue piece, and a yellow piece. So you're going to select which piece of yarn you would like. I think I'm going to start with blue. And if this piece is a little bit too long for you, you can always cut it in half. So you're going to take your yarn needle and you're just going to thread one end of your yarn through the hole. Got to get all these strands of yarn through there, just like that. And I just like to loop it over just a little bit. I'm not doubling up my yarn because I may not have enough yarn to finish my drawing if I do that. So I'm not going to double it up. Really young kids may have a hard time with the yarn getting tangled, and in that case I recommend maybe cutting this piece of yarn in half. If the yarn is too long, it gets easily tangled. So now I have my piece of yarn on my yarn needle. It's just folded over a little bit, and at the end of the long end I am going to tie a knot. And I'm just going to do just a little overhand knot, just loop it over itself. And I'm going to actually do that twice and try to get those knots to sit right on top of each other so it's a nice large knot. Hopefully you can see that. All right, and now I'm just going to decide which part of my butterfly or which part of your image you want to make the color that you have on your needle. So I'm going to make the body of my butterfly this blue color. So I'm going to start from underneath my fabric, and I am going to just start down at the bottom and stick my needle from underneath up through the top and pull. Now when I get to where that knot is, I don't want to pull really hard or it'll pop right through. So I just want to lightly kind of have it stopping at that point. And now to trace the body, I'm just going to do a simple running stitch. A running stitch is a very basic in and out stitch. And I'm going to be following along the line of the butterfly's body in my case. So to do that, I'm going to go in and pull just to make a little stitch, and then come back out. And when I come back from underneath, I want to make sure that I'm still on the line I drew for the butterfly's body. And I'm just going to do that in and out, all the way down. In and back up. In and back up. And I'm just using my thread or yarn to trace along the body of my butterfly. Now this is called a running stitch, just a simple up and down. And we can do the entire butterfly in a running stitch. So if you're doing this project with young students, then you might want to stick with the running stitch and just practice that up and down stitch and get really good at that. But I do want to show you one other method of stitching that will give you a solid line instead of a broken line. So this line, if you look at the butterfly, you can see that there's little gaps between the stitches. And so I am going to show you how to do that so that you don't have those gaps. Okay, so now you can see my running stitch tracing the outline of the butterfly's body. On the other side of the butterfly's body, I'm going to show you how to do a back stitch. So to create a back stitch, you're going to start the same way. You're going to start from underneath and poke up. But instead of stitching forward along the line, we're going to go back to where the last stitch ended. So this stitch started here and ended here. My new stitch is right here. And I'm going to go back and put it in the same hole that my last stitch ended in, like that. And you can see now there's no gap between my stitches. So I'm going to come from underneath, still on the line that I'm tracing. I'm going to pull up. And then instead of going forward, I'm going to go backward to where the last stitch ended. This is called a back stitch. And this is going to give you a nice solid stitching line. Go up from underneath, go back to where the last stitch ended. Up from underneath, and back to where the last stitch ended. And you can see the difference in the type of line that you get. With a running stitch, you get a broken line, and with the back stitch, you're gonna get more of a solid line. So I'm gonna quickly finish up the line of the body of my butterfly. Now, back stitching does take more yarn because you're actually kind of making loops. So it is gonna take more yarn than a running stitch. So if you've got a really large design, it may take most of the yarn in your kit if you're gonna use a back stitch for the entire project. I think it would be really interesting to see how you could combine those two stitches. So maybe I keep a back stitch for my butterfly's body, but use a running stitch for its wings, or vice versa. The combination of stitches in your work will give you different textures. And remember, that's something that we're talking about this month. Texture is the way that something feels, or even looks like it feels. Sometimes texture isn't about touching, it's just about what it looks like it feels like. All right, so I'm coming to the end of my butterfly's body, and you will be able to see the difference in the two stitches. Now your goal is just to completely trace all the lines of your design with your yarn to create a beautiful stitched drawing with lots of colorful texture. And I am right here at the end, and you can see the difference in the two stitches. This is my running stitch, and this is my back stitch. So solid line on the back stitch, a broken line on the running stitch. Whichever you choose is sure to make a beautiful textured stitched design. I wish you the best of luck in completing your Simple Stitches project.